Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, a generous distributor of jokes, japes and over-exaggerated jollity, here to talk to you today about Sun in opposition to Jupiter. However, Jupiter is also in opposition to Mercury, Mars and trining Venus in Virgo presently, so really overwhelming all of the inner planets with his over-exuberant embrace. So before I get into the nitty-gritty of the kinds of things that occur during a Jupiter opposition cycle, I thought I would take some time to explore some of the complexities and nuances behind this planetary deity. We get the character of Jupiter from the Greco-Roman god Zeus, Jupiter, Jove, call him what you will. In all of these mythologies, he was held to be the king of the gods on Mount Olympus. So even though the religion of that time was polytheistic, believing in many different deities who were all in some ways archetypal representations of the different forces that we encounter within the world, but also within ourselves experientially, existentially, and psychologically, Jupiter/Zeus was in some way meant to be the one who kept all of them in order. All of these different gods had different wills, different desires, different whims, different caprices, different ideas about how the world should be, about what the fate and destiny of mortals should be. So to prevent everything in descending into chaos, the idea is that you have some king. You have a sovereign, you have an emperor, you have a ruler whose job it is to have the ultimate say about how things play out in the world. So Jupiter is a symbol of a larger cosmic order, of having some kind of grand social vision, some grand cosmic vision of how things should be, and being the one responsible for maintaining that vision, for maintaining a sense of union, communion, integration, and a larger purpose of why things are the way they are. So equally, when we think about the responsibility of a historical king, in the past, kings, queens, emperors, empresses, popes, pharaohs, call them what you will, their job was to be a divine representative of cosmic order. That even though they were mortal flesh and blood humans like the rest of us, at that time they were perceived to in some way be the living embodiment of the gods of whatever system of religion was currently politically endorsed at the time. They were the embodiment of a more heavenly, celestial view of the world. If you were a king or an emperor, you could potentially rule over a vast territory which could encompass many different cultures, many different racial divisions, many different types of people. And through all of that potential disparity and variation and diversity, the job of a king was to some way find a way of unifying all of these different peoples so that they didn't descend into chaos, to maintain some greater sense of order, to be the upholder of a certain type of rule or worldly wisdom. So Jupiter was the god that all the other gods went to when they needed some kind of dispute settled. If Athena had a vision about what should happen to this mortal, whilst Hera had another, ultimately it was down to Jupiter to determine their fate, to decide what was the most reasonable, rational, just and righteous course of action to take. And likewise, people who are strongly Jupiterian, according to their horoscope, also tend to be the people who others will approach to ask them for wisdom, for sane and responsible judgment, to be the one who looks at things from that bigger, detached lens and says, this is how things should be. Now, because of this, in looking at the journey of the planets of the solar system beginning with the Sun and ending with Pluto, so from the deeply personal to the deeply transpersonal, Jupiter represents the halfway point in the development of that consciousness. As we move from Mars to Jupiter, we are gradually entering a more impersonal realm. If it's your job to oversee the cosmos, to uphold everything together, to have a greater picture of how everything fits together as an integrated living organism, you need some degree of detachment and impersonality. If you were down there on the ground, mingling with all of the rest of the mortals, you're going to be too caught up in your own everyday petty concerns and desires to really have a impersonal and unbiased view of how things should be. This is why Jove is depicted as having his throne upon Mount Olympus, so that while he's up there in those dizzying, lofty heights that are penetrating the heavens, he can look down on the world and see everything that is going on all at once. And in that sense, he has that greater comprehension of how all things are interconnected. He's not getting caught up in the details of things like Mercury in Virgo does, but rather he's seeing everything playing out at once. He understands that something occurring over here may have resonances that are happening on the other side of the world, which you might not appreciate if you are in the world as well. So he's trying to get this kind of global, mapped out picture of how everything interrelates and works together, which is why Jupiter in our horoscope can often indicate how we approach finding a larger sense of meaning, purpose, and cosmology in the world. In the past, Jupiter was primarily the representation of religion, because in the Piscean age, we used religion to try and map out a sense of why everything in the world worked as it did, to believe that there was some kind of greater law or rule behind why apparently chaotic or random actions transpired as they did. If we're looking at things through the Jupiterian lens, we say that nothing is accidental, nothing is random, but that everything is operating according to some kind of law which indicates why things unfold as they do. Now, because of this, Jupiter transits can often align with times when we have some kind of larger vision of where we are at in our lives. It's almost like when you're playing a video game and you're there mid-level battling an army of skeletons or caught up in who knows what different struggles and turmoils and personal strifes. And when you've reached the end of the level, you have that moment where you see the map of the game as a whole, that there's the end point over here, there's the point you started, and this is where you're at now. So you have that ability to step back from your life and be like, oh, okay, when I actually look at it from a bigger perspective, I've made an awful lot of progress. I've come all of this way from my beginnings. And even though it feels like a lot of hard work, when I look at it from this enlarged perspective, I can see I don't have that far to go to get to my ultimate goal, that I am within a stone's throw of success, that there is every reason to feel heartened and positive and optimistic, to feel like I am certain to succeed if I carry on as I am. So that ability not just to get caught up in the mundane immediacy, but to be able to see both forwards and backwards, to have that more encompassing vision of how everything is playing out, can give us a greater sense of meaning and purposefulness in life. We can see that all of those little interactions that we've had, which might have just seemed chaotic and meaningless and random at the time, when we look at the overall effect they've had on us and how many of those little interactions have led us to where we are now, it can give us a much greater sense that we are working in accordance to some kind of greater destiny or fate or personal heroic narrative, that there is an ultimate meaning and goal and purpose to our life, which if we could tap into, would make us feel more godly and more powerful ourselves. That would make us truly feel like we are the kings and emperors and empresses and architects of our own reality. So whilst Saturn transits can often be difficult because they are humbling, because they remind us of our weakness, of our mortality, of our frailty, and of the duties and obligations that we have to others, that give us a sense that we are only special insofar as the fact that we serve and act with a sense of duty and responsibility towards the rest of the collective. Conversely, during Jupiter transits, we often feel more important. We often feel that we are in some way agents for God's will, that because we have a divine purpose, we must by extension be divine. And we end up feeling energized, empowered, but also optimistic because we feel more in touch with an awareness of all the different things that we could be, of all the different things that we could achieve. We look up to the heavens and we dream and envisage a future in which we could magnify ourselves, in which we could enlarge ourselves, in which we could be more than what we are, in which we could transcend some of the limitations of our ordinary humanity and embody some godliness in the world that other people would recognize and desire to celebrate and be enthralled by, to feel that we are in sense a king or a queen who is worthy of the worship of others. So again, whilst during Saturn transits, we often feel conscious of our limitations and therefore have to be practical and realistic and find a way of working within a narrower and more pragmatic vision of life. During Jupiter transits, we often feel that we could actually transcend our limitations, that our limitations aren't limitations at all, that they are just opportunities that we haven't yet figured out a way of working to our advantage. Jupiter is the eternal opportunist who, when everything befalls him, when anything comes into his path, rather than saying, oh, this has to be terrible, this has to be bad, this has to be a misfortune, it looks at everything that happens to it and says, okay, well, there has to be a larger meaning or purpose behind this. How could this thing that has come across my path potentially help me to achieve the fullest potency of my being? So just as in the gospel, Jesus says, with God all things are possible, during Jupiter transits we often feel like God is on our side, that there is some higher force that is looking out for us, which because it has painted a destiny for us, is willing to clear the paths and smooth the way and make the crooked straight so that we are able to reach our goals more quickly than we normally do. If Saturn tends to bring obstacles in our path, then Jupiter can be the one who seems to smush everything out the way and accelerate our progress so that we can be more sure of getting what we feel we deserve on that greater, more divine level. Jupiter was perceived as the one who gives us gifts. I often connect the archetype of Jupiter to the character of Santa Claus, this fat, jolly, benevolent man who flies through the sky on a red sleigh distributing goods and gifts to everyone just so that they can have a good time and taste some of the abundance and sweetness and luxury and opulence of life. So during Jupiter transits, instead of just staying within our lane, of staying within the boxes and carefully boundaried fence posts that we have placed around ourselves in our life, during Jupiter transits we are more likely to push our luck, to ask ourselves, okay, normally I would be inhibited or reserved in this situation, or not take this chance, or not put myself out there, or feel too shy or cowardly or pusillanimous or not willing to ask myself how great things could be. But with Jupiter whispering in our ear, it almost feels like, well, actually, why not reach out and grab the things that I want? Why not take a risk? Why not throw myself wildly into something and have that optimistic trust that whatever happens is what is meant to happen? Jupiter encourages us to be gamblers, to be risk takers. We associate him with the quality of faith. And whilst faith is a word that is normally used in a religious context, in general, faith represents the ability to have trust in something that is unseen, that is invisible, which is unmanifest. To believe in something that hasn't happened yet, and yet which, through the power of our faith, we believe we can make manifest, which we believe we can make happen. If we think about the process of creativity, we can have those moments where we are suddenly struck by some great revelation, where we are struck by some inspiration, where we have an idea for some big masterpiece of, a great opera that we could write, or a play, or a painting, or anything. And we are only likely to sit down and to pursue the creation of this inspiration if we believe that we are capable of creating it. We might have a great vision, but if we're feeling too humble, if we're feeling too small, if we're feeling too cynical and doubtful of our own abilities, we might say, oh, well, that's a nice idea, but I could never make it work. When Jupiter is on our side, we believe we can make anything work, even if it means pushing ourselves harder, even if it means pushing ourselves to the very limits of our abilities. If we are in love enough with the vision that the heavens have temporarily opened to us, then we are willing to chase it, to pursue it, to throw all ordinary caution to the winds and hopefully succeed. And precisely because Jupiter often lacks that reserve, often lacks that tentativity, when he does throw himself into something, into the unknown, he often does it with tremendous confidence and charisma, which can be very winning and which can often have a very positive effect. Of course, there can be big dangers and disadvantages to such vainglorious strutting and swaggering about. When we take big chances, we also leave room for there to be big losses. The problem with Jupiter is that whilst Saturn may be too excessively conscious of its own limitations to the point where it ends up imprisoning itself in a very narrow box, Jupiter is so in love with itself and its awareness of all its infinite possibilities that it often doesn't know when to stop. When it can be too busy chasing a million things at once, that it ends up going nowhere, that it lacks a thorough commitment to any of the potential goals or dreams that it has set itself. It sees all of those dreams dazzling and sparkling for it at once and thinks, I will have them all because I will deserve them all. So Jupiter can sometimes end up being the victim of his own successes. I often think about that classic scene that you see playing out in movies where someone is on a lucky winning streak in a casino and they've won big and they've won big and they've won big and they won big, and when they've been playing roulette, just somehow that little ball always ends up exactly where they need to be and they rake in all the dosh. And yet, rather than folding once they are reaching a great amount of wealth, they keep going. They say, no. I've been lucky this far. I've won this much. I'll keep going so I can win even more and more and more. And what do you know? They end up losing everything that they have accumulated. If they'd stopped at a sensible point, they could have gone home with a nice amount of wealth. But because they were too greedy, because they were too indulgent, because they were too in love and had too much faith in their own ability to succeed at all times, they end up being punished for their own hubris, for their own excessive zeal. So during Jupiter transits, especially during the opposition, it's good to always have those moments where we give ourselves reality checks, where we try and take a moment just to pause and have a breather and not push ourselves too much, to think about the potential dangers of things that we are doing, and to not always assume that everything will work out just as it has to, because it's often during those moments that we think we're too big to fall, and then guess what? We fucking fall. So this represents one of the other less salubrious sides of Jupiter, that even though Zeus in Greek mythology was the king of the gods who was responsible for maintaining cosmic law and order, if we look at his own personal life, it was often not particularly orderly and not particularly moral, and often guided by nothing more high and mighty than his own desires, lusts, whims, and caprices. Because Jupiter always is looking over the horizon at what it doesn't have rather than what it does, of what it hasn't yet achieved or experienced, rather than being satisfied with its experiences so far, it always has that curious restlessness that is pulling it away from where it is right now. You know, when we look at Zeus's marriage to Hera, he was not content just to sit on Mount Olympus, while Hera did his knitting, and, he could do some carpentry or whatever it is that husbands do when they're maintaining a domestic idyll. He was off chasing nymphs and mortal women. He wasn't satisfied with what he had. He wanted new romances, new love affairs, new experiences. And I think one of the reasons why Zeus wanted this is that if we look, he had a particular seduction tactic. Often he would present himself to a mortal, but in the guise of something else, maybe some kind of magical creature, or disguise himself as another human being. For every woman that he seduced, he presented a different side of himself. He shape-shifted into a different form. So there's a sense that one of the reasons Jupiter is so restless, always hungry to travel to new places, to encounter new cultures, to encounter new knowledge, to have new love affairs, to have new romances, to see and taste and experience and savor things it's never known before, is because that reflected in all of these different multifarious experiences, he's getting to discover a new side of himself. I think we can all have those moments, especially during Saturn transits, where we feel a bit tired of ourselves, where we get tired of our same old habits, our same old responses to things, where we start to feel like a bit of a cliche, that someone who is entirely governed by their routines. Yet when we do something new, we also discover a new side of ourselves. By expanding our vision of the world, we are also in some way expanding ourselves, learning something new about ourselves, which can make us feel more important, it can make us feel more divine, that can make us feel there is more of the world living within us that we can feel nourished and fulfilled by. But just as in the life of Zeus/Jupiter, we could see him maintaining cosmic order and harmony whilst also not living out or living within the limitations of that law and morality himself, people with strong Jupiters can often, if they are not careful, fall into the archetype of someone who does not practice what they preach. Someone who goes out into the world dispensing wisdom and counsel and charisma and whole strings of thou shalts, none of which they have any intention of living in abidance with. There's almost this sense that because they are in some way outside of the law, in order to have a clear enough perception of it to preach about it to other people, that means they don't have to be governed by the same law, that they are in some way bigger than the law because that they are the ones upholding it. Now, unlike many planetary oppositions, which can often be very tense aspects, times of both crisis, stasis, and stagnation, Jupiter oppositions can often be very enjoyable, can be times of great fulfillment, flourishment, and fruition, however, with some caveats. I mentioned before that I associate Jupiter with Santa Claus, and whilst Santa Claus was known for distributing gifts and bounty to all, he was also in some way a purveyor of cosmic rule and order. He didn't just give gifts to anyone. There was that folkloric belief that if you're a good child, you get good gifts. If you've been a naughty, nasty, miscreant child, then you get a lump of coal. So I feel like during the Jupiter opposition, it can often be a time where we feel if we have worked hard, if we have put the labour in, that we start to be rewarded for our toil and for our efforts, that we feel that after all of the difficult times that we've experienced on our journey, that things are finally coming together, that we can see the goal in sight, that there is a sense of impending completion, of finally getting the things we want after all of the sacrifices that we've had to make along the way. However, an opposition is not the end, it's the halfway point through the cycle. And I think the main thing we have to keep in mind during some of all of the excesses and joyfulness and exuberance and jollity and cheerfulness and optimism that we can often experience during this point of the cycle is not to overreach ourselves. That just because it looks like the end in sight, just because it looks like we're on the cusp of getting all the things that we've wanted and have been reaching for and have been aspiring to, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually in hand yet. So I think one cliched aphorism that comes to mind with this transit is not counting your chickens before they've hatched, not banking on things that look like they are soon to come into fruition, but which yet haven't manifest. Jupiter can be so enthusiastic, so willing to run with the joy and enthusiasm that he feels from his successes, that he gets carried away, that he pushes things too far, that he takes things too far, and ends up losing or scaring off the few things that he has managed to acquire. Let's get some real-world examples just to kind of describe the kind of excessive behaviour that we should try and be a little mindful of during this transit. Let's say someone has, after a long period of working, had strong indications that they are going to be promoted, that they are going to be raised to some higher office that they have been yearning for a long time. And they are so certain that they are going to get this promotion that all the signs they've received are definite, 100%, and inarguable, that they want to celebrate. They want to celebrate their victory before it's actually arrived, and so they go out and they spend a huge amount of money, and maybe they think, my income's going to be double what it is now, so I'll move into that nice new house that I've mentioned, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to splash out on this car or this musical instrument or what have you that I've received. And then later on in the transit, they find out they're not getting that promotion at all, or maybe they are, but it's not the same one they were reaching for, and that all of the things that they have splashed out on are definitely not within its budget. Or let's say someone has been single for a long time, and maybe they've gone on lots of dates and they've met lots of people, and yet none of them have quite been what they've been looking for. None of them have hit the spot. None of them have excited them. None of them have had the chemistry or fireworks that their romantic nature is looking for. And maybe during the Sun-Jupiter opposition, they meet someone who seems to be perfect for them, who seems to be a living god or goddess, who seems to be everything that they've been looking for and more, and who seems to be reciprocating all of their passions and desires with the same mutuality and intensity. And because they're so certain that this romantic union has been fated, has been destined, that yes, this is the person who I have been looking for all this time, they maybe get a bit too over-involved, a bit too over-eager, end up scaring the other person off, and they've lost what they almost had. So again, this is an example of Jupiter pushing too hard, being too over the top in his response to things, and not knowing when he has to temper himself or moderate himself. Sometimes when we're feeling good, when we're wanting to celebrate, when we feel on top of the world, we think we have the King Midas touch, that anything we do will turn to gold. And so sometimes when we reach out and touch something that doesn't want to be touched and smacks us back, it can come as a big shock to the Jupiterian consciousness. I mean, that said, like I said, you know, some truly amazing and wonderful things can come into fruition and can be realized at this time. I have many lovely memories of really incredible things that have transpired under these transits, where it truly has felt like my dreams were coming true, where it truly has felt like things that I had always wanted but thought were impossible were becoming that bit more possible. And yet not all of those things necessarily lasted, and we have to enjoy the fruits of our experiences while they are, whilst also understanding that they are transient and will not necessarily last forever, that what looks like gold on one day can easily look like fool's gold on the next. Jupiter was the god of travellers. He was believed to be the one who protected them on the road, because when you are travelling, you need a lot of faith, especially if you are hitchhiking or backpacking or going anywhere on foot. You are relying a lot on the hospitality and the kindness and the generosity of people that you are meeting along the way. Everything you are doing is a risk, and yet you can't have the adventure, you can't have the wonderful experiences that come with travelling without being willing to potentially face the risks that come along the way. So the Wheel of Fortune keeps on spinning, and we make the most of it if we carry along spinning with it without holding too tightly onto any of the individual spokes on the wheel. But just to give some examples of how I've been experiencing some of these Jupiterian oppositions so far, I may have mentioned previously that I am a musician, and for a very long time now I have been working on a big, complex prog rock album that is epic in every sense of the word, being a kind of very personal cosmic retelling of Homer's Odyssey in musical form. I first started writing this towards the end of 2019, and due to the various lockdowns and delays and personal difficulties that I've had along the way, it's been a very slow process of actually bringing it together, even though it didn't take me that long to write it. However, I'm happy to say that now half of the album is mixed and mastered and ready to go. I'm just waiting to receive the second half, and then it will be ready for release. So at the moment, I'm currently experiencing some of the exhilaration of something that I've laboured on for a long time, finally appearing and manifesting as I dreamed it was meant to all those years ago, 3 years ago now. But like I said, oppositions are halfway in a planetary cycle, and often during oppositions we can see how far we've come, but we also begin to have visions and sensations and previews of what the next part of the cycle is going to be like, or what it is going to be about. It often makes me think of the tarot card of the Two of Wands, where you have a powerful looking man standing on a balcony overlooking a vast city and holding an orb in one hand. It's almost like he's having that moment of saying, okay, well, you know, I've achieved this much, I've conquered this much, where do I want to go next? What do I want to conquer next? What is the next part of my quest going to be about? And to me, one of the most exciting things about this project nearing completion and culmination is that it now frees up my energy to go, okay, well, that's one album almost done. What am I going to write and create for the next album? What's the next part of the cycle going to be about? Anyway, I have rambled incoherently for long enough. I hope you enjoy this video. Please share any of your insights about your own experiences of the Sun opposition Jupiter cycle with me. If you want to contact me more personally, you can email me at thestarsunraveled@outlook.com. You can follow me on Instagram at astrologyinunderwear, and you can support me on on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thestarsunraveled.